Welcome to our next installment of Soul Library. For those of you that are regulars here, and I recognize a few of you as having been to all the Soul Library. Soul Library is when we meet once a month. We encourage you to get a glass of tea. Hopefully you're after dinner already, and to join us from the comfort of your home for an interview with an interesting soul. We pull out a soul from our library, right? The Jewish people is a massive library of souls, at least so far as this program goes. And we get to hear a little bit about somebody's story, hopefully with the goal of inspiring ourselves. For those of you that attend the weekly Sunday to be a mensch class, you're very familiar with last week's Mishnah. Just last week, we learned a Mishnah from Pirkei Avot, Ethics of Our Fathers, which says, Ezo Chacham. The Mishnah is asking all sorts of questions. Who is strong? Who is wise? Who is rich? And the Mishnah says, who is wise? Ezo Chacham alomed mikol adam. Someone who learns from every single person. Every person that they see, every person around them, they learn some sort of lesson in their service of God and their personal journey. Because every one of us has a story, and if we allow other people into each other's stories, then we can learn a lot about each other and a lot about the world. Before we get started, there are a couple of announcements. Number one is, of course, a huge thank you, a huge yasher koach. So, as you all know, welcome Barry, all the way from Manhattan. So nice to see you. Welcome. A couple of thank yous are in order. First of all, a tremendous yasher koach, as always, to my dear Rebbe, to my dear wife, who is, I'm sitting here so nice and calm in the office, and she has two babies with her. I hope Menachem's not listening, because to call him a baby is a big no-no now. And of course, a tremendous yasher koach to Rabbi and Rebbitzin Hanoka. I know this gets a little bit redundant that I thank them at the beginning of every single one of our events, but really it's a tremendous honor to have joined here the team at Chabad of Pasadena, and really everything that we do here at the Pasadena Jewish Academy would not be possible not for the physical infrastructure. I'm sitting here in a beautiful office and the bills are being paid, etc., but also the community infrastructure that they put together. So tremendous yasher koach to Rabbi and Rebbitzin Hanoka. They're here somewhere. I won't spotlight them, but a tremendous thank you. I want to welcome you all tonight. And I also want those of you that are here from Pasadena, those of you that are here from around the world, and a special shout out to the community from Northridge in this Soul Library endeavor. We've had a lot of interest from the Chabad of Northridge community, so welcome to all of you. And of course, I have to give a big thank you to those that we don't know their names yet. And they are the sponsors for this evening. The Soul Library interviews are funded specifically by generous donors like you, as I always say. And we are looking for 10 sponsors for tonight. If you are able to be a sponsor, it's only $54. If you want to take 2 spots, that's also okay. And if you'd like to help sponsor, all you need to do is go to PasadenaJewishAcademy.com/donate, put in $54, put in the notes that it's for the Soul Library interview, and a tremendous yasher koach. Hopefully by the end of this evening, we'll have the interview covered, and we'll get to give a shout out to exactly who you are, the donors, the viewers like you, like we say. So that's another big thank you that's in order to people that we don't know who they are yet. If this is your first time here at Soul Library, we encourage you to join us each month as keep your eye on your inbox for these interesting interviews. I can make a quick announcement now about the next one. I don't want to take away from the spotlight of tonight, but actually the next Soul Library interview is going to be in person, outdoors in our gorgeous tent, and hopefully the parking lot if we need some spillover space, with Mrs. Dina Horowitz, who lives here locally in Los Angeles. Obviously, we'll be socially distanced, and masks will be required, and you can save the date. It's March 14th at 7 o'clock p.m. if you'd like to join us. Okay, I think those are all of the preliminary announcements. Other than that, I'd like to ask you all to please join me in welcoming a very special individual. Many of you have said that tonight's Soul Library, I know each month is special, and each guest has their insights that they share and their special story that they share with us. But tonight we have the honor and privilege of hosting all the way from Florida, Rabbi Devlin. And his talk or interview or what have you is usually titled From Altar Boy to Rabbi. That's because Mattis grew up for 18 years in a devout Catholic home. His mom, of course, is Jewish. His dad is a religious Catholic, and we're going to find out exactly how. But the story goes that it was one fateful night in a Manhattan coffee shop that Mattis's life took a mega turn in a different direction. And today, you see him here in front of you, a proud Jew, an observant Jew. And obviously, there's a tremendous journey, as always, that goes from point A to point B. That's our goal here tonight, to hear all about that. So here at Soul Library, we always like to give a silent round of applause. Like, if I can ask you all to give us a silent round of applause as we welcome Mattis. If you can put your camera on, or your view on gallery view, you'll get to see everyone who's applauding you as we have a warm welcome to Rabbi Mattis Devlin.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us, Mattis. This is very special. This is a special privilege. I know that many people already have a lot of questions. I'm not the only one, and I'm going to be doing the interviewing. But
I already have a question too. I'm not sure where point A and point B is. That might be point C and D also.
Very good, very good, very good. In other words, there was a point before point A, and there's a point C after point B. Life is an ongoing journey.
Infinite amount of points on a line.
Very well said. Very well said. What a great note to start off on. And I just want to encourage that anybody who's in the audience, if you'd like to take part in this interview, please type some questions in the chat. Whatever questions you may have, type them in the chat. Whether you have them now already, just from watching the promo, Mattis, we sent out in advance of your joining us. We sent a clip from the National Geographic that covered you all those years ago. What year was that interview?
That was 10 years ago.
10 years ago. Wow. Okay. So if you have any questions, you're welcome to type them in the chat as we go along, and we'll try to incorporate them as we go through this. Mattis, I have to start off by asking you straight up from the beginning, tell us all at the beginning. So let's start from the beginning. Let's try to do this in chronological order. What are your first memories growing up? In other words, you're growing up in a Catholic home. What are your first memories growing up? You obviously grew up in a large family.
Sure. Yeah, I grew up, I'm one of 11 siblings. I'm the middle child, which might explain a bit of the story that we're going to hear throughout this interview. I am number 6. I have 5 older siblings, 5 younger siblings. And, I definitely had a wonderful upbringing, growing up in South Central Pennsylvania, in a small city called York. Very, very Christian area. A little bit of a Southern style town, even though it is Pennsylvania. Not a very Jewish area. I didn't really know any Jewish people growing up, but I have a lot of fond memories of growing up. We were, on one hand, a lot of my memories involve, going to church and taking part in religious gatherings and religious observance in the Catholic Church, whether it was going to Mass every Sunday or going to Mass for other religious days, or, mine as well as all of my siblings' milestones in Catholicism that we celebrated, our communions and your first communion, first penance, confirmation, all of those celebrations and the holidays, really a big part of our upbringing. And even though it's maybe something that's no longer a part of my life, it still is, something I do look back with, look back on with a certain fondness. And, really just grew up like any kid in the 90s, running around outside, going out on my bike with my siblings or my friends for hours at a time, just told to take a watch and come home at, 6 o'clock or whatever. Anything you might find in a small town. I don't know if they did in the big cities in the 90s, but small town in Pennsylvania.
I'm
New York.
I have to say for everybody watching, Mattis is exactly my age. We are both 30 years old. This upbringing, he's making it sound so typical. In Brooklyn, we weren't allowed out with a watch and told come back at 6 o'clock. Never.
We were told, yeah, have your watch with you, come back at 6 o'clock. We'd be out for 5, 6, 7 hours at a time. Parents have no idea where we were, but they just said, come back home.
You went to public school?
I went to Catholic school. We all went to Catholic school from preschool until senior year of high school. That was a big part of our upbringing, was going to Catholic school with uniforms and just whatever stereotypes you might know about Catholic school. Probably some of them are true, some of them are exaggerated. There weren't very many nuns or priests in my school. My father has plenty of stories of the nuns and the priests in school.
Was it co-ed or were the genders separated?
They were not. It was co-ed school.
Co-ed school.
Our school was co-ed, yeah.
Very nice.
And I just had a lot of good memories. Growing up, I felt privileged to a certain degree. My father is a doctor. My mother is a nurse. And, we didn't grow up in, as lavish as many of my friends might have. A lot of my friends in school, grew up pretty well. But we were definitely had all our needs taken care of. We all trained in music and dance and the arts. My father very much pushed us in literature to just be well read, to be well versed in anything, whether it was fiction, nonfiction, sciences, history. My father has a nice library at home that he always was encouraging us to take whatever volume off the shelf we wanted to read.
So not necessarily just religion.
Not just religion, but yeah, really anything, to be cultured, to be cultured, as they say. He had a vinyl collection also. That was another library that was supposed to be off limits, but by nature of the fact that he's a physician, my father was not home so much, so we broke into the vinyl collection pretty often, and I hope he's maybe hasn't discovered how many records we scratched, but
Yeah. So your dad was a physician.
It was. I feel like we were a pretty well-rounded family. We were, religious Catholic family on one hand. We volunteered in the church. We were altar boys. We sang in the choir, etc. And we were also very well cultured with music, literature, the arts.
So your dad was a physician. Your mom was, I assume, with 11 siblings, your mom was a stay-at-home mom.
It depended. It depends. It depended upon how much she wanted to be out of the house. My mother is an RN, which seems to be a dying breed these days. For anyone who's
I think we actually have at least one RN that I know of on here, but I don't know the statistics on the numbers, but yeah, go ahead.
They're undervalued nowadays, especially an RN. My mother's been a nurse for over 40 years now. But, so when she wanted, we would have babysitters and whatnot, and she would work full time. And when she wanted, she would stay home. It right. Really went on and off. I have a lot of memories of my mother being home always, and I have memories coming home to babysitters,
Right. I guess where my question was leading, I was trying to figure out if your mom was involved more in your upbringing than your dad. Would you say so? Or on the weekends, they were both though?
It was interesting. It's interesting to I don't know if I could come up with an exact split, but definitely when it came to our religious upbringing, which was a very big part of our life, that was from my father and from our school and church, which my mother didn't take any role in. Even when she married my father and agreed that all the children would be raised in Catholicism, she never took Catholicism on herself. Now, my mother wasn't, from when I was growing up, my mother was not so involved or affiliated or religious, whatever term you want to use, in Judaism, but she definitely always considered herself Jewish, and she does consider herself Jewish still. She never actively participated necessarily in Christianity. She would, when we were celebrating Christmas or Easter, obviously she was, making a nice dinner and she was sitting with us when we opened presents, but it was never
that was
something
clearly the understanding between her and your dad that she was going to, right, that she was going to support that. It seems that way.
Right. She would support my father and his upbringing of right. us, but she for herself was Jewish. So even though my father.
Hold on. I'm sorry for interrupting you. So walk me through this. Your mom comes from what kind of Jewish family? Obviously, your mom is Jewish. That makes you Jewish. But
my mother, and this was something actually I didn't really know growing up. So I'll tell you, we always knew that my mother was Jewish. She was not hiding that we had a mezuzah on the front door.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, we celebrated Hanukkah each year.
Really? So your dad, what was your dad's view of this?
My dad was fine with it. It was always like, that's mom's like one thing she does, for her religion.
Right. So in other words, these were both, this was an agreement between an intermarried couple, as there is all over the United States. This was the agreement that the children would be brought up Catholic, but that if she wants to do certain,
my mother would do what she wanted to do, right? She would do what she wanted. And in fact, when they were first married, my mother still went to a synagogue, and that just kind of, that phased out at some point for different reasons.
Interesting.
But
have you ever asked your mom what happened in those early days? In other words, like when they got married, clearly you're aware that there was some sort of agreement.
My mother grew up in what she calls a traditional Jewish family, which in her eyes, traditional means what her family did, which was they kept Shabbos when she was a child. and they kept kosher in their home, and they celebrated all the holidays and everything. And as she was growing up, my grandparents were going through some marital issues, and eventually they were divorced. And during that kind of time of turmoil, when my mother was around 10, 11 years old, and as my grandparents' marriage began to really fall apart, a lot of things fell by the wayside, and they stopped keeping Shabbos, they stopped keeping kosher. My grandmother really still wanted to. My grandfather, it wasn't so important to him. And so he kind of no longer was like going along with that. And at that, they just, at a certain point, my mother told me they had stopped everything except they still celebrated Hanukkah. So that was something she always held on to, was celebrating Hanukkah no matter what.
And that's why that's something she made sure.
Her and my father, they were in the same med school in Jefferson in Philadelphia. And that's where they met. And my mother at that time would still go, she said at least once a month, she was going to a conservative synagogue for Shabbos services. And when she met my father, he's a gentleman and a scholar, as they say. And she thought he'd be a good husband, a good father. And, it was very romantic, whatever. They fell in love and they got married fairly quickly. And then my mother agreed the kids would be raised in Catholicism. And, when my father graduated med school and started his residency, or perhaps when he was an intern, as it was at the time, they had to move to the city where I grew up. And there was one synagogue there. There was a Reformed temple, and my mother started to go there. And this was in 1980, and my mother told me at that time, pretty much everyone there was married to a Jew. Maybe even every single person was married to a Jew. Wow. There was no intermarried couples, and my mother was like the odd one out. It was like just her coming. Wow. And she couldn't just kind of blend in with the crowd. It was a small town, small synagogue.
Everybody knew the story.
She felt a little bit othered because she was married to someone who wasn't Jewish. So she hung around. She kept going here and there. And then at some point, she was, after already kind of feeling a little bit ostracized, the temple got a new rabbi that she didn't really see eye to eye with in different areas. So she just didn't appreciate this person as a rabbi because of certain beliefs he had that she didn't jive with my mother. So she stopped going. And then it just kind of, came down to she had her mezuzah and Hanukkah. And so that was my only experience with Judaism growing up, was celebrating Hanukkah every year. And it was never really for me. It wasn't for my siblings. It was just like, we're supporting mom. But it was nice. It was a nice experience. We'd light the menorah. We'd take turns lighting the candles. So you didn't get a chance every year because there was four of us. But singing this Hebrew song, and I had no idea what the words of this song or this Hebrew song were. But you would just memorize them from hearing them year after year. And it was nice, play dreidel and get chocolate gelt, and we would get checks and cash from our Jewish relatives. My bubby would visit usually during that time. My grandmother would come, Aleva Shalom. She would come between Thanksgiving and Hanukkah. That was her annual visit. But that was my mother's background in Judaism, and that was my extent of my interaction with Judaism growing up.
Very interesting. So I'm glad you mentioned about, so it seems the attitude was mainly, even though these Jewish things were being done in the home, you were very clearly not Jewish, to yourself at least. The way you viewed yourself.
Right. I had it was not even not a thought, not even afterthought. There was not even I couldn't even have in mind that, there's a possibility I could be Jewish. I never heard such a thing that you're a Jew if your mother's Jewish. It's never something I heard about. It was never taught to me. So I couldn't even fathom that idea.
Right. I actually want to talk to you about that later. When you did finally find out about that, what your reaction to that was, because I know there are a lot of people that I meet all the time that you tell them your mom is Jewish, that makes you Jewish, and they're trying to figure out why, what, I don't get it. Why does it go up to the mom, to the dad? Where does this even come from? So I want to talk about that when we get there. But first, I do want to mention that the stories you were just saying, especially about Hanukkah in your home growing up, etc., that's actually what tipped me off to your story, I think it was this year or last year that you sent out that picture of the guide, the Hanukkah guide.
Yeah, that was 2 Hanukkahs ago, a year ago, a year or 2 months ago. Yeah.
Anyways, that's how I was alluded to your story, and I remember then thinking this is such a fascinating story. For those that are watching, Mattis sent out kind of on the Shluchim forums, which means the Chabad rabbis, because Chabad rabbis are always looking for stories of the effect that they're having on people that they don't know of, because it helps us keep going with our work, etc. One of the stories that Mattis sent out was a picture of one of his siblings lighting menorah in their home. Does your family still live in York?
Yeah, most of them, sure.
Right. And they were using a Hanukkah guide, which was a Chabad Hanukkah guide published in the 80s, I think, right?
Yeah, like 1983 or 84.
1983, and that was mailed out by some Chabad rabbi to probably thousands of people on his list, because what does it cost to send it out, and who knows, whatever. And this family that has such a slight connection to Judaism, or at least at the time did, now I'm sure they have a much stronger connection to their Judaism, but was using this Hanukkah guide, and that's the only way they had to be able to light the menorah, and they used it for decades, I think.
My mother still has it.
Still this year, yeah.
That's the same. So ask any of my siblings, they could tell you it was a yellowish orange color with a green border, trifold.
So even though they have a brother, now who's become an Orthodox Jew, they haven't been able to be hooked up with a modern laminated.
I'm sure. I mean, I've sent them, year after year, but
I'm sure.
This was monumental.
The family one, the ancient one.
Box of Hanukkah supplies that gets stored away. This is one of the things.
It's like the Maxwell House Haggadah had many,
Right. Imagine some people still have the Maxwell, that they got in Ralph's or whatever you have.
Right, yeah.
You got 20 years ago. We'll have that one.
So let's move on a little bit. So you're growing up. So by all accounts, you're completely Catholic. There's no part of you that you feel specifically Jewish in any way. And this is your upbringing. Your mom is Jewish. You're lighting menorah with her. It's cool. It's exciting. It's hip. You're getting more presents. You're getting more. Okay, great, beautiful. But by all accounts, you're going to a Catholic school. You're fully Catholic. Going to church, of course, every Sunday and on holidays, etc. So walk me through when, before you get to the Manhattan coffee shop, your life took a little bit of a change. Walk me through your teenage years.
So I definitely, we struggled. We all struggled in our teenage years in our own ways, and we still have life struggles. But I definitely did I take the cake maybe I went through a lot for a lot of reasons. When I was in middle school, I began to question a lot of what I was brought up with, different beliefs in Catholicism.
Specifically, the religious parts you started to question.
I started off with different religious, questions in the religious beliefs that I was raised with, and not really gaining any satisfactory answers or kind of being pushed off in some ways. I began to explore other branches of Christianity, and I began to, look into other religions even. And there was a time when I was exploring other branches of Christianity, and I would have to go to church twice on Sundays because my father required that we needed to go to Catholic Mass. If we would go to a different church, it didn't, to him, it didn't count. It didn't fulfill our obligation to go to Mass. So I'd have to wake up and go to the early Mass on Sunday. And then, in fact, I played drums in a worship band for a different type of church. So I go to church twice every Sunday for a while. And even so, it was still, even at that time, I didn't really believe in Christianity anymore. I was going to Catholic Mass because my father wanted me to. The worship band, I felt something that was just like playing drums in the church. It just was like, I'm a percussionist and I'm a musician. And I just enjoyed the style of music that was being played. Gave me a certain adrenaline rush, something very enjoyable. But I was really focused on, learning philosophy and trying to find out about other religions, Eastern religion, as much as you might think a 15 or 16-year-old boy might be able to, maybe very, very much a surface level, especially we didn't have, Wikipedia and Google and exactly what we had today. We had, Encarta. If anyone remembers Encarta Encyclopedia, 99, the disc put into your computer. But I was trying to explore. And the thing was, at a certain point when I had rejected Catholicism and I rejected Christianity, which really, a big part of my upbringing as a Catholic was the morality of it. That was really, that's a pretty big part of the Catholic religion. So when I rejected Catholicism, along with that came just a general rejection of the morality that my parents tried to raise me with, and anything that was, I was taught was right or wrong. And I just began a general rebellion just against my parents, teachers, the school administration. I had a lot of run-ins with the police, or mostly it was me running away from the police. It was a while until I actually was arrested, although there were plenty of times when I could have been. And I was just, hanging out with the wrong crowd, as they say, or a lot of my friends' parents would have said I was the wrong crowd their kid was hanging out with. And, I was just, I started using drugs. I started drinking, like many teenagers, experimental at first, just having fun, and, became more habitual. And during this time, my best friend this is when I was 15 years old. My best friend was hit by a car and was killed. Someone asked if I skateboarded or played sports. I tried playing team sports, and I'm horrible. I'm not very athletic. There's a few of my siblings were very, very athletic. I'm not one of them, but I did skateboard. I was very into skateboarding, and a friend of mine and I, we used to do a lot. Yes.
I know. I just want to interrupt you for a second. So just to clarify, when you say you were rejecting the religion, the morality that your parents brought you up with, it was not necessarily because you had specific questions, or was it? It was mainly just because you were a teenager and you wanted freedom.
So it was there was some of both. There was an element of both. It started off with certain dogma of the Catholic Church that I had questions about, and no one really cared. I think mostly it was that people just didn't care to answer me. They thought I'm just a young kid, no one took me serious. And because of that, whether or not there was someone out there that could answer my questions, probably there was, but no one really addressed it to me. And it really just turned me off to it all. And I just decided okay, well, it just must not be true. It must all be, totally, fake. And that led me to that's what led me to explore other branches of Christianity. I thought, that's what I'm familiar with. And I did feel that faith and reason and kind of purpose in life were there was a value to that. So I was exploring other branches of Christianity because that's, along the lines of what I was familiar with. And then at a certain point, I just rejected Christianity altogether. And around that time, I just was like, let me do whatever I want. I just
so the rebellions were kind of they were paralleled and interlinking a little bit. You're saying it was kind of like, yeah. Right. In other words, the fun and not necessarily because somebody's questioning their faith. Does that always lead necessarily to them?
Right.
It was the police.
It was exacerbated, I guess, because of the fact that I was also I was in the middle of rejecting not just the religion, but it was literally my upbringing. Catholicism was my upbringing. That was my life.
And there was no structure to it. In other words, it hadn't landed. You were in the middle of just rejecting, but didn't have necessarily another alternative that you were landing on yet.
Right. So the alternative I had was anything that could fill the void.
Right.
So, music was a big part of my life. Skateboarding, a big part of skateboarding that really drew me into that was there's a whole culture. Skateboarding is like a lifestyle. It's kind of that rebel lifestyle, being a punk, fighting the man, anarchy. That was like that I was really drawn to that.
Absolutely. For those of you in the crowd that were here when we interviewed here in person, Mr. Frank Mink, also a very fascinating story. Also, that was a lot of what a lot of his young upbringing as well. And he was anti-Semite as a youngster. But
also just because someone's asking, just to get back to it, my friend and I used to find every extreme sport we could do. So we used to do street luging. We used to, basically you would lay down on almost like a skateboard on your back, with your feet first, and we would go down hills where there's cars. I mean, it was crazy. We were doing crazy things. And tragically, my friend was hit by he went through going through an intersection, a car ran over him, and he died pretty quickly from that.
Wow.
Pretty soon after.
That must have had a very strong.
Yeah,
This was one of your skateboarding buddies.
We clocked ourselves going 42 miles an hour once. It's just official, I'm letting you know.
Wow.
And so he died from that. And you could imagine I was already, for anyone to lose a loved one, and for a teenager to lose, a best friend. This was someone who was like, a brother to me. We lived in the same neighborhood. We went to the same school. I was already in a place in my life where I was very, very fragile. And when that happened, when my friend died, I became depressed. I was diagnosed with depression and anxiety, and that definitely did not help my situation in life. That was a big part of what caused, kind of just habitual marijuana usage to become more regular, and then to become looking for things, that were more exciting, drugs that were more exhilarating, and a lot more drinking. And I somehow managed to still get through high school, even with a very serious problem. I really hid it from a lot of people. My family never really figured it out until much later. And a lot of my friends, really never realized how much I was using and how much I was drinking, even in school. But I made it to my senior year. And really at that point, I was just like, I have to like cut all this garbage out of my life. I always was able to get pretty good grades in school. I had very good SAT scores. And I was like, you know what? Let me just, keep my head down. Let me just get through senior year, stop getting into trouble. And I'll go to a school far away from home. And, a new place. Like I was kind of looking for that fresh start. And that was kind of my resolution when my senior year of high school started, which this was, sometimes it's nice to set a time frame. This was when I was 18 in 2008. The 2008-2009 school year. So in November of 2008, it was my mother's birthday. Actually, it was November 26th.
Wow.
And it's not a very good birthday present that my mother got that year. I was expelled from school, and it was long in the coming. I was shocked they didn't kick me out long before then. And not only I was expelled, but they called the police and I was arrested. So my mother got a phone call, not just from the principal, but also from the local precinct, where she was, they requested she should come pick me up. And she told them I was 18. I could see myself out the door. I could hear her through the phone yelling. She was not very happy. This was just really the culmination of probably 6-7 years of building up of just my life getting out of control. Pretty soon, I was no longer living in my parents' home. Within a week, I think I was no longer living in my parents' home. And I began to rent an apartment. And I was just like living life. I thought it was the best thing in the world. Like at that point, I was just like, I have my own apartment. I'm 18, like all my friends still live at home and go to high school. I can do anything I want. I'm just like living it up. I was supposed to have a job and I was hardly showing up. I got fired. I got another job. I got fired from it pretty quickly. I was like just making enough money to just like get by. I was stealing pretty much everything I needed. I was just throwing parties at my apartment. So then you could imagine I ended up getting evicted from the apartment I was living in from too many noise complaints and other reasons. And my life was just really just spiraling out of control. And at that point, when I woke up to an eviction notice, on my apartment door, I was like, I was just thinking, man, like, what am I doing? Like, my life is just falling to pieces. And, there's got to be more to life than this. There has to be more to life than just this stupid town and this garbage life that I'm living and the decisions I'm making. And it's not leading me to the right place. So I realized I have to just get out of here. That's it. I have to just leave. And, I didn't really know where I was going to go. I really didn't have a clue. I just figured, people in the past have left home to find out where they belong, and I could do it too. I had been really inspired. The literature I was reading at that time in my life was, I'm sure many are familiar in the crowd with On the Road by Jack Kerouac. Other similar literature, from the beatniks and the hippies and poets. And this was like that was the life I was trying to live. So I just thought, I'm just going to get out of here. I'm just going to drive. I don't know where I'm going to go. When I run out of money, I'll just, I'll clean dishes in a diner. and I'll move along and I'll work, as a farmhand in the Midwest. And I'm just going to like go around and I'm just going to find out about myself. I'm going to find where I belong in this world. And I didn't have really such a great plan. I was 18, I had no money, maybe a few $100s. I had a car. I just got in the car and started driving. I didn't tell my family. I had like one friend knew where I was going, knew that I was going on this like journey. And that was it. I just started driving. Soon after this, my cell phone was disconnected because I had no money to pay the bill. So I was literally just like, it was just me. It's just me, 18 years old, just driving on the highway, just looking at this, trying to figure out which city sounds interesting.
No specific destination.
No specific. So I had it long term. I wanted to get to California, but as a kid, as a teenage kid that never traveled anywhere, from small town Pennsylvania. I mean, even New York was like going to China. Like my family, we went to Delaware to the beach for 2 weeks, 1 or 2 weeks each summer, and that was the extent of our travels. We never went anywhere. So I was like, one day maybe I'll get to California if I can make it out west, But I was just driving. I stopped in Philadelphia. I have some, I had some family and friends in Philadelphia where my parents are from Philadelphia. And I was in New Jersey. And then I see after a few weeks, I see a sign in New York City. And I'm like, oh, sounds interesting. Let's go to New York City.
You have your own car?
Yeah, I had a car. Yeah, as a teenage kid in America, that was, I have a car, I didn't have like my friends. My friends drove BMWs and Mercedes.
Okay.
And
All right.
I had an Oldsmobile that I paid for on my own,
I guess I'm trying to figure out how much of a connection, obviously from your perspective as an 18-year-old, you were very independent, you were very much on your own. I'm trying to track this story a little bit from your parents' perspective. In other words, the car, the insurance on the car, the registration on the car was paid for by who? By you or by
No, I paid for all that. I paid for all that. My parents, when we were growing up, if we wanted to have a car, we had to buy the car, we had to pay the insurance.
You had to earn it all yourself.
We had to pay the gas. It was us, yeah. Our cell phones, we had to pay. I mean, my older siblings didn't have cell phones.
I'm sure you've spoken to your parents. I mean, obviously you have, but your parents.
At that time, I didn't speak to my parents.
No, I understand. And they really had no clue where you were, or they did know somehow?
They didn't have a clue. No.
Wow.
The last thing they knew was that I had been renting an apartment in like a really, really hick area of York, Pennsylvania.
Right.
There's different levels of how hick it can be out there. And then that's it. Like I didn't really talk to them. I hadn't really spoken to them. They only knew because my siblings told them maybe.
Have you ever asked them what their reaction? Because I'm curious at that time, especially they seem to be a very, religious family. I'm assuming the rest of your siblings followed them all. They grew up Catholic. They went,
No, not really. I mean, my older siblings had their own share of excitement in life.
You're saying your parents were already, they knew to let teenagers. I guess my question is if they were worried about you as you're out.
They were definitely worried about me. There's no question they were worried sick about me. Didn't have a way to get a hold of me. I was ignoring them. And then, I didn't want to have anything to do with my family. I didn't have anything to do with my parents at that time. Okay,
so you see a sign from New York.
Yeah, I see a sign. I'm sorry, New York City. I had been to New York City a couple times. My high school, the music department, we had gone for like a day trip to a Broadway show and to go to like Hard Rock Cafe or something. So, I'd seen Times Square. Sounds good, New York City. There's a lot of like, lore that comes along with, Greenwich Village and places like that. So I thought I have to go check out New York. So I go to New York and, when you want to have fun, you can have lots of fun anywhere you go. And I pretty much just blew through every penny I had. I had nothing left. My car, which I was sleeping in many nights, was impounded. Basically, I came back one night to my car and it was just gone. It just wasn't where I left it. And it supposedly was parked illegally, so they towed it to the Brooklyn Navy Yard. I had no money to get it out. So I don't know what you would consider me before that moment, but for me, that was when I became homeless. Like, as long as I had my car, I felt like, I had a place, I had a home. And at that point, I began living on the streets. I was literally living on the streets in New York City. I was sleeping on park benches. This was in February of 2009. This is February of 2009, freezing cold. I know you're probably enjoying good weather there now in California. Here in Florida, this is the best time of the year. New York,
Not
it's a
so
different
much.
ball game. As you remember, growing up, that's the worst. And that was bad. I remember sleeping on park benches with with just a fleece coat. I was getting sick, so I began to sleep in subway trains, in the heated subway trains, and you can sleep a couple hours at a time until that like alerts you the train is the last stop, and you just go back the other way. You take the train back to the other direction, and that worked out for a little while. And I did this for a few weeks. For a few weeks I was sleeping just wherever, and really when I was at like a breaking point, I was sleeping in a subway train, and I woke up with someone's hand in my pocket, which was pretty disturbing, you could imagine. And now this was another homeless person, and I was not so clearly homeless. This was someone who was, like with like, trash bags tied around the holes in their jeans and stuff, like really, it's a very, very sad situation, you see homeless people are in. I had ripped jeans also, but I had ripped jeans and long hair because that was my, that was my style. So this guy's hand is just like deep in my pocket, which is a really, really disturbing thing to happen. So I was like really freaked out, and I started thinking I need to sleep somewhere a little more safe. Now I'll tell you, a lot of people ask me why I didn't go to homeless shelters. So first of all, anything I saw from homeless shelters in like movies was not like, didn't seem like a place you would really want to go to, such a situation. And really more importantly was I felt that if I go to a homeless shelter, I'm giving into my situation. Like if I go to a homeless shelter, that's it. Like I'm stuck in this place and I have nowhere to go. To me, I'm just like trying to figure out how I can continue my journey. I'm trying to figure out how can I get, $50 from someone so I can get a bus ticket to another city. And I'm walking along, and I see a Starbucks is open 24 hours a day in Manhattan. So I just go into the Starbucks. And this is the night, the coffee.
This is the moment.
This is the moment that's in the flyer. Yeah, this is the moment that was advertised. I walk into this Starbucks, just like looking for a warm, safe place to put my head down. And I put my head down on the table. I'm sure everyone remembers falling asleep in class. So I just put my head down, fell asleep, on my arm. And I wake up a couple hours later. Nowadays, they kick you out of Starbucks, and you can sue them, and it's fun. But it wasn't so exciting back then. I woke up, and there was a teenage boy and girl at the table next to me. And this boy he has a yarmulke, he has a kippah on his head. So I start thinking, okay, he's a Jew, my mom's a Jew, start a conversation. I never really had a problem speaking to anyone about anything. That's a gift that was bestowed upon me from my mother. So I just start talking to him.
And you're thinking you're just going to get $50 from him?
I'm thinking, oh, not $50, but a few dollars, get a few bucks from him.
Let me get to the next city. Maybe a coffee.
Maybe a bed to sleep in for the night. Just like, I'm just going to talk to him and see, what can I get out of him? So I said, hey, what's up? You're Jewish? And he says to me, yeah, obviously, nice, warm New Yorker. And I said, oh, listen, my mother is Jewish. So he looks at me kind of funny and he says, yeah, so you're a Jew. And I said, I'm not Jewish, my mother is, but like I was baptized, I'm Catholic. I went to Catholic school and church. I don't really believe in that stuff, but I'm not Jewish, I'm Catholic. So, Catholicism has a very strong culture to it. So, even if someone doesn't necessarily believe in Catholicism or is not, what they call, a Catholic and, in good standing with the church, he would still consider themselves Catholic, so he tells me, no, if your mother's Jewish, you're a Jew. That's how it works. So I'm like, well, what does that mean? Like, how can you just like be a religion? And he's like, no, listen, your mother's Jewish. She has a Jewish soul. When she gave birth to you, she passed on a Jewish soul to you. So I thought, oh, that sounds kind of interesting. And we started talking. And he just started telling me all kinds of things about Judaism. And turns out this young man was like 14 or 15 years old. His name is Mendy. And Mendy is from a Chabad family. And he's hanging out with this young lady in Starbucks. This was on a Saturday night. And Mendy, like myself, was on a journey. He was kind of at a crossroads in life. And he had grown up in a religious Chabad family. And he wasn't really sure about, what he was brought up with. He wasn't sure about, how he was raised. And the interesting thing, though, was that even at a time in his life where he was really questioning things, when he met me and I told him my mother's Jewish, he's just like, no, you're a Jew. And we spoke for 6, 7 hours, 8 hours. And the whole time he's just telling me all kinds of things about Judaism and different teachings from the Hasidic teachings, Hasidic philosophy. And, he asked me a little bit about, like, who am I? Where do I come from? Why am I here? So I told him, the abridged version of my life. And at a certain point, he just tells me, he says, listen, if you're not sure, what to do in life, you're not sure where you're supposed to go, you should go to this place called 770. Now, I thought he was going to tell me about some type of like a homeless shelter, like a Jewish homeless shelter or something. And he tells me, it's a very big synagogue. It's one of like the main synagogues in the world. And just go there and everything will work out. So I thought, sounds a bit strange, but it could be interesting. I've never been to a synagogue before, so it could be worth checking out what people do in synagogues. So he tells me, which train, which stop. So this is like 10 in the morning, maybe Sunday morning, and I walk into 770, which for those who don't know, 770 this is the headquarters of the Chabad movement. This is the Rebbe's synagogue, and it's a very, very packed place. It's in a neighborhood where there's thousands and thousands of Chabad families living. So you can imagine on a Sunday, it's the place is rolling, it's on wheels. So I walk in there, and I don't know what you're supposed to do in a synagogue. I'm just standing in what's kind of like the lobby, and someone quickly approaches me and kind of apprehends me and begins to speak to me in some foreign language and seems very excited and very enthusiastic. And I asked this guy, I'm like, hey man, do you speak English? And he says to me, no, hat, cover your head. And I could barely make out like what he's saying through his accent, let alone like why he wants me to cover my head. And he sees I'm just kind of confused. And, you could imagine, on one hand, the headquarters of the Chabad movement, in Brooklyn and Crown Heights, New York, you can imagine there's all kinds of people from all walks of life every day going, walking, in and out these 24-hour doors. At the same time, if you don't look like a, card-carrying member of the Chabad movement with a beard and a black hat, you stand out, and you're probably, someone's going to come over to ask you to put on tefillin, or, if you want to learn something about the Parsha or whatnot. So this guy is just telling me I have to cover my head, and he takes me actually into the shul, into the sanctuary, and he puts a small kippah on my head, and he makes this kind of sign language like this to me, and he's saying some word to me. He's like pointing to his here, and he's telling me some Hebrew word, and he keeps repeating the same Hebrew word over and over again, and he's saying tefillin. He keeps going like this, and I'm just like looking at him like, what? Like, I don't know what you're saying. And he's like, no, tefillin. He keeps repeating this word over and over. I'm like, I don't know what you want. Tell me in English. I'm happy to oblige. So he says to me, Jewish? And I said, yeah, I think so. I don't know. This guy in Starbucks told me last night that I'm Jewish and I should come to the synagogue. And he says, is your mother Jewish? I said, yeah, my mother's Jewish. So, is your grandmother Jewish? My grandmother is the most Jewish person I know. It's like, wow, a Jew, not tefillin, best day of your life. So I'm thinking to myself, I saw there's free coffee and cookies in the lobby, so it's a pretty good day for me. So this guy introduces me to one of the rabbinic students. Aside from being a synagogue, it's also a rabbinic yeshiva, a rabbinic academy. Hundreds of young men from all over the world learning in 770. Now, there's plenty that speak English, and there's plenty of young men, or anyone, old men, young men from Brooklyn itself there. But he introduces me to some Israeli who also barely speaks English. And, when I first looked around 770 and I was trying to take in my surroundings, it was very exciting. I couldn't help but notice there was just so much happening. There was people who were, I'm assuming it's like prayer, and other people just reading religious texts, other people just carrying on having conversations, people, taking shots of vodka at like 10 in the morning, but okay. And later I figured out, on the occasion of someone's yard site, the anniversary of one's passing, usually after the, shacharit, the morning prayers, we take a little schnapps, just to say a good l'chaim in the person's memory. But it was just like, you could tell that this was like a place that meant something to these people. This was an important part of their lives. This was their community. This is where they gathered. And I couldn't help but think about, the church that I grew up in, and just to compare the two. When I was in 10th grade, 2 years before this occurrence that I'm telling you about happened, in religion class that year, we learned, it was called Sacred Scriptures, the course. And we learned a lot of things from the Torah and from the books of the prophets and from the writings, what growing up we called the Old Testament. And then we learned about, what it was like for in the times of Jesus. What it was like in his lifetime? What was Israel like? What was Jerusalem like? So one of the things we learned about was the temple, and what the Holy Temple was like. And I remember we probably spent like a week learning about the different parts of the temple and the different services that the Kohanim did in the temple. And they really, really learned in depth about the whole thing. And you really get a sense that this was like some like magnificent edifice that the Jewish people built. And their whole life was focused on this building, and they faced towards, it to this day, even after it's been destroyed for thousands of years. They're still praying in the direction of this place, and people still go visit the last wall that was it wasn't even the actual wall of the temple, it was a surrounding wall. And you realize like this place meant something to these people, and it's still a part of their lives. And our teacher told us at the end of this lesson that our church, our parish, is the temple of today. And I remember thinking it was like kind of a silly comparison. Sure, our parish is important to us. It's where we go on Sunday, every Sunday for Mass. But the rest of the day, I come home after Mass and we're watching Sunday football, with some chili, and it's like, that's it. We're not thinking about the church. I'm not thinking about the place. It's not a part of my life until Sunday again. And now that I'm standing here in this 770, this synagogue, I'm like, wow, like if our place of worship is supposed to mirror the temple of Jerusalem, like they did it here. Like you could tell this place is alive. It's like pulsating. This is a part of their life. You can see that this, just from being there for a few moments, you could tell that these like four walls are something that is special to these people, and that their community is built around this place. But now a few minutes later, I'm standing with this Israeli guy, and he's rolling up my sleeve, and he pulls out this little velvet bag, and he pulls out these little black contraptions, and he starts to put this strap on my arm. And I'm looking around, and I'm like, I don't know, it's kind of weird, this place. All these people have a box on their head and a strap on their arm, and they're all wrapped in this funny sheet with strings, and they're like shaking this way and that way, and they're muttering these gibberish words. I'm like, I don't know, it's like I walked in some type of Twilight Zone over here, but like there's an exit sign. So it's easy to leave the Twilight Zone because I can just walk right out the door. So I thought, okay, this guy seems excited to put this thing on me. So, I'll do it. I'll do this thing. I'll make him happy. And then bye-bye Twilight Zone, Now, when he says to me, okay, he says, repeat these words. It's like he was trained. There's if you know a few phrases in English, you're going to say, repeat after me. So he starts to say the blessing. Now, I have no idea that these words, Baruch, Atah, Hashem, Elokeinu, Melech HaOlam, I have no idea that that's like a blessing, a bracha, I don't know. but I recognize the words because these are the same words of this Hebrew song that we sang every year when we would light the menorah. So I was like so excited. I was like, wait a second, like I know this. Like this is something that's like a part of me. So I started to say the blessing on my own. So of course I said the wrong blessing because I was like saying one of the Hanukkah, brachot. But it was, whatever, it was good.
Hold on a
I
second.
tend to think that
Hold on a
God
second.
was, what's that?
What you describe, first of all, what you describing is so classic. It's like any Jew you stop on the street and you ask them to put on tefillin for the first time in years. Obviously, they start making the Hanukkah bracha. That's the bracha everybody knows. But
Sure.
I'm curious about this moment. So you don't associate any holiness with this or any sort of meaning to this. It's just familiar. You're like, oh, this place is Jewish. Seems like
Right.
the temple.
Exactly. So I have no inclination to anything about being that this is some type of religious or spiritual or anything, esoteric or
You just walk in and a foreigner
it's not like that.
Sure.
I'm just like, okay, there's some Jewish thing, but like I know about it. So I'm like really excited because something about like that familiarity made me like almost like it was like the jump start. It was like, hey, I know about it.
Well, you had also been gone from home for a long
it.
time. This was probably familiar to you, like it brought back memories of home.
Right. It just made me think about this whole Hanukkah thing.
Right.
But the thing is that within that familiarity, it made it feel like it was a part of me. It wasn't some foreign thing, even though on one hand, I never was in a synagogue before. A couple hours earlier, not even a couple hours, 5 minutes earlier, I had no idea that people with beards, I would never have seen, if I saw you, Rabbi Rivkin, I would not have thought that you're a Jew. I would have no idea what you are.
So it wasn't right. I got it.
I would have no clue. If I saw a person with a beard and a fedora and strings, I would be like, what kind of weirdo are you? Like, I would have no clue.
The reason I'm asking so many questions about this moment is because I know that in the flyer and in the marketing and really, as you tell your story, really the Manhattan night seems like the moment that it turned around. And obviously that is a big moment. It's kudos to this Mendy who seems like he was on a journey of his own and decided to take a few minutes to you. And have you ever met him again? I'm assuming not.
Yeah, a few hours. We know we speak once, maybe every couple of years.
Oh, so you still know? You know his last name. You're in touch with him. Okay, so we'll talk about that shortly. But I'm saying kudos to him for spending the time to talk to you about that and point you in that direction, which obviously had a very big impact on your life. But leaving that aside, as a rabbi, and many of the people here on this Zoom are familiar with this, we always point to the moment that a neshama gets aroused, which obviously a neshama soul gets sparked and gets aroused whenever. But a mitzvah, there's something about what a mitzvah does. And that's why I'm grilling you about this moment. I'm curious about your feeling. Obviously, you've thought about this moment thousands of times since. But I'm curious how you remember that moment. Besides you being lost, there's a sense of familiarity to home. And I'm trying to figure out on a spiritual level how you felt.
So it's what follows is we'll touch on that point.
Okay.
I have tefillin on. And this guy tells me, to say the Shema. And then he gives me, I remember, it's interesting. He gave me an English siddur, an English prayer book. Usually when we put on the film with people, I'm sure, Rabbi, can we usually say Shema with them in Hebrew, Ve'ahavta l'reach, Ve'ahavta es Hashem lekecha. But he gave me an English siddur, and he just said, if you want, read through these couple paragraphs. So I'm reading through the Shema, and while I'm reading these words, I'm thinking to myself, I knew these words are clearly, it sounds like verses from the Bible. But I guess if there was anything from what I grew up calling the Old Testament that we didn't learn about was probably the Shema. The Shema is probably something that of everything in the Torah, that's probably one thing that would disrupt the narrative of Christianity. So I was reading through it and I'm like, okay, this is some type of verses from the Bible. It's interesting. I wasn't sure what they exactly meant. But when I finished saying Shema and I said the word truth, right? I didn't say emet because I read it in English. I said truth. And in that moment, I had it's very hard to describe how it was, but I'll call it a flash or a realization, if you will, where I recognized in that moment a lot of events from my life, from the time I was a kid, where I saw that because this event happened, it led directly to another occurrence in my life, which caused me to make some decision, however minute it might have been, that then led directly to another happening. And I saw especially, not necessarily big things, just everything in life. But then I saw especially in those last couple months of my life, how everything that happened to me that I thought was like worse than the last, getting kicked out of school and then my parents' house and my job and my apartment and winding up homeless in New York. And then I was in this particular Starbucks on that particular night where this boy Mendy was also, who like, it was so clear that he was like trying to like run away from his upbringing, yet he still told me about it, which was like, to me, and it was such a fascinating conversation that we had that I still think about, but especially in the moment. And now I'm here in this particular synagogue, and I was like, wow, like nothing in my life has ever just happened. Like nothing was just for no reason. And it wasn't like I just thought about that for me. I was like, wow, like this is must be how the whole world works. Like everything has maybe a pattern or maybe a reason for it. There's some type of guiding force that regardless of like my decisions that I made, and I made a lot of decisions in life and a lot of bad ones up until that point. And yet all of it somehow pushed me along to eventually, have this conversation with Mendy that I had in Starbucks last night, which, in my mind at the time was like, just happened a few hours ago, and then led to me to be in the synagogue. And not that I thought that this was the pinnacle of my life, but just that I realized that everything was divine providence. And that my main takeaway was that, if divine providence is real, that means God is real, whatever God means. But more importantly, in many ways than even recognizing, these certain truths, was that I'm a Jew. Like I just, in that moment, it was like, wow, I'm Jewish. Like, what does that even mean? Like when Mendy told me in Starbucks I'm a Jew, I'm like, okay, sure, yeah, my mother's Jewish. Oh, I have some type of cultural heritage. Like, what does that mean that I'm Jewish? Like, I didn't click in my mind to think, about it, like really think into it. I'm just like going along for the journey. Let's go see what a synagogue is. Sure, I'll do some weird strap thing. Like if it gets you off my back, I'll do it. But now I'm like, wait a second, I'm Jewish. What does it even mean that I'm Jewish? Like, yeah, I've heard all about how like Jews, what are they? A religion, a culture, ethnicity, a race, like a nationality, like whatever the answer is to that, which maybe none of us even have. Like I'm a part of that. And like, I got to know more about it. Like, I need to know who I am. Like now I'm at a moment where like, I don't even know who I am, but I know I'm a Jew and I have to learn about that. So this young man who put on tefillin with me, he asks me a really important question. Another one of his in his bag of English phrases was, he asked me if I would like to go to yeshiva. It was just like that. We put on tefillin and then he says, do I want to go to yeshiva? Yeshiva is kind of a formal Jewish education. Yeshiva is pretty intense, especially as the older you get.
I just want to interrupt you for 1 second, Mattis. I want to clarify that I have to give a lot of kudos to the characters in Mattis' story.
They were characters.
No, because it sounds almost like, yeah, anybody you meet in 770 is going to put on tefillin with you. That part I'll give you. But then immediately we'll ask you if you want to go to yeshiva. I don't know. Look, maybe maybe I'm just a sore thumb, but I would not have suggested to any random stranger. I would put on tefillin with random strangers in 770. I would not necessarily ask them as the follow-up question, would they like to go to yeshiva? So
so I have some friends that like had been hanging around 770, maybe lived in New York and came to 770 a number of times and got to know a few people. And then eventually people said, hey, do you want to go maybe learn some classes in yeshiva? And then maybe eventually they like became students in yeshiva. But I never met anyone else that was just like
number one after tefillin.
A Jew off the street, just
listen, obviously it was meant to be. That's what you were saying about this being Hashem guiding your way. So obviously
that's what it was, because that was the life I was living. Like if it was, if that happened to me now, if I came into 770 now, like, more of living more in a normal lifestyle, and someone would have said that to me, I don't know, I'd probably been like, dude, like, no thanks. Like, yeah, I put on tefillin, thank you. But that was just, it just made sense. It's interesting.
The right question at the right time.
That's it. So I said to him, in my mind, I'm like, I don't even know what I can't repeat the word that he just said to me, yeshiva, like I can't repeat it. But I just had one question that I asked him. I said, is a Jew supposed to go to that place? And he tells me, of course, every Jew has to go to yeshiva. So I said, okay, I'm in, let's go. So he takes me half a block from 770.
1 second. You had no idea you were signing up for multi-weeks, multi-months, years. You had no idea. So you
No, in
just
my mind, I'm going to a place like that. I'm just going to take out for a day. I
another
don't even.
5 minute experience.
I'm just going. It's just part of the.
Devlin,
Yeah,
Shiva.
it could
All
be
right.
5 minutes, right? I don't know. I'm just going. Just he tells me. So I asked him like, what exactly afterwards. I said, what exactly is it? As we're taking our half a block walk to the place. So there's rabbis and classes, and. So I'm like, okay, sure. Like I would love to learn. So I walk into the yeshiva, and then basically I get there just around breakfast time, and yeshiva has like a late morning breakfast because there's a class in the morning, and then there's a morning prayer, and then afterwards you have breakfast. So I chanced upon breakfast, which isn't the greatest food, but for me, compared to what I was eating the last few weeks, I had breakfast, and then there was a class in the Talmud. Now, I don't have a clue what the Talmud is. And by no means could I truly follow along the whole back and forth of what they were learning, but it was intriguing. It was intriguing as kind of, this rabbi's academy says this, and other rabbi says that, and how they're bringing, proofs from verses, and they bring stories and anecdotal evidence, and like trying to come down to, what the final ruling is. So it was intriguing. At the beginning of the class, the rabbi who's teaching, he says, "Oh, I see you have a new face. Tell me what's your name." So I said, "Oh, hi, I'm Matt." So he says, "No, your Hebrew name." So I said, "Oh, my full name is Matthew. It comes from Hebrew." And he's like, "No, when you were born, you had your bris milah, you were given a Jewish name." I don't know. I'm not really sure what you're talking about. So afterwards, after the class was over, this rabbi asked me if I wanted to speak for a few minutes. So we're talking for a little while. He asked me who are you? Where are you coming from? So I found myself again telling the story of my life. And after this, he did a few things that I later realized he was kind of testing, I guess, my Jewishness. If there was, he wanted to test the veracity of what I'm saying, as if you could make any of this up. But he puts a piece of paper in front of me. One of the things he did, I didn't realize at the time that he was making it like a test, but he put a piece of paper in front of me, and it was like a grid. And he asked me, do I recognize anything from this paper? So I said, yeah, sure. This here is Gimel. Gimel is when you get everything. This one here is Nun, which is you get nothing. And Shin is like stands for some Yiddish word. You have to put one in. I recognize that it was the Hebrew alphabet, and I knew the 4 letters on the dreidel because I knew about Hanukkah. So then I assumed that this must be like the full Hebrew alphabet. So he thought it was pretty funny, that's what I recognized. And I just went on my merry way. Like, I don't know, I sat in like maybe a class in Jewish law, and then I just I ate lunch, and I left. I went back to the city. I went back to Manhattan. I was like, okay, cool, I'm a Jew. I sat in a couple classes that seemed like authentic. I don't know, like it just seemed really great and really interesting. And I was just kind of like, reinvigorated to like figure out a way to get some money and just get out of here and continue my journey. Like, I guess I found what I was looking for in New York. I discovered that I'm Jewish, and I'm going to always cover my head, and I won't eat pork anymore. I don't know, whatever, like 5 things I'm like might have known about Judaism.
Pause. So you throw that off as if, so you had made a decision to wear something on your head because of this experience.
I decided, okay, I'm a Jew, and I'm going to do what Jews do. And I maybe knew about 4 or 5 things. I'm just making up a number.
Right.
Whatever, people know that Jews wear like a little thing on their head, and Jews don't eat pork. I don't know.
Did you took the yarmulke home with you? You were planning to wear it?
Yeah, I kept it on my head. I just kept it on my head and was like, yeah, I'm a Jew. I'll wear this thing.
All right.
So that night, I'm in another Starbucks, and I'm like thinking, I have to like, like I have nothing in life. I was really, really broken, and I was starting to think I should maybe call my parents and just tell them, I'm really stuck. I really need their help, and I'm mulling this over in my mind. It's not like so instant, And as I'm thinking about it, And I'm getting ready to ask a guy sitting at the table next to me. I remember so vividly to this day. I remember he had a red shirt on and he was bald. And I was about to ask this guy if he had a few quarters or, some change so I could go to a payphone. And at that moment, there walks a young man and a young lady into the Starbucks. And this guy has, he has a beard and he has a a fedora, he has a black hat. And he's with this young lady who has, a skirt or a dress, on whatever, dressed modestly. And I'm like, hey, these are Jewish people. A day ago, I would have no clue that these were Jewish people. Now, spent a couple hours in Crown Heights, I know these are Jews. And I forget about this, dire situation that I'm totally homeless. I have nothing to my name. I don't have anything to eat. I have nowhere to sleep. But I'm just like, hey, these are Jewish people. I want to talk to them. So I was hoping they would sit near me. And they did. They ended up sitting at the table right next to where I was sitting. And I took off I had a Phillies cap on because I was still wearing the kippah. I wanted them to see because I wanted them to know I'm Jewish. Like in my mind, I'm like, Jews are like a tribe or whatever. They're like, Jews know they're like close with each other. So if they see that I'm a Jew, maybe they'll start talking to me or something. So they weren't taking the bait. So at some point I look over to them and I said, Shalom, as if this was like some secret word that was gonna spark a conversation. And, the gentleman says back to me, Alechem Shalom, was machst du? So I tell him, I'm so great. I did this thing for the first time today. And he says, wow, mazel tov in your bar mitzvah. And I'm like, yeah, sure. He was like, so it almost was shocking to me. He seemed so excited about it. And he asked me, how did I come to put on the tefillin for the first time? So again, I'm telling the cliff notes of my life. And he tells me, he's like, hold up a second. I have one question for you. Where are you spending the night? So I said, I pointed to the table and I said, I'm already checked in. And he says, no. You got to be taken care of. Come, you spend the night in my dorm. So it turns out this young man, this young lady, they were on a shidduch date. They were, at a point in their life where they were, looking to get married and, start a family and, move on in life from, single life. And, maybe a, family, friends, a matchmaker, someone thought they might hit it off with each other. So they had gone on a few dates before this. And as you could imagine, this is a fairly serious process, and not going to just, frivolously talk, trying to discern, is this someone that I could see myself raising a family with, that I could, build my life with this person. And I'm just inserting myself into their conversation, talking to them. And this young man, just happens to be, is a rabbinic student in 770 where I had been early that day. And he has a dorm room around the corner. And he asks me if I, he's happy to give me a bed to sleep in for the night. So I went back they took me to a restaurant to get some food first. And then I went back we dropped this young lady off at her home, and we spent the night in his dormitory. And Rabbi Rivkin is cracking up. He sees the
I'll tell you why. Because I was interrupted many times on a shidduch dates with various girls. Drunks in the middle of a bar. They come over to you and start. I think it was with Gitti actually that some drunk in a bar started hitting on her in front of me. I mean, he completely clueless, doesn't know what's going on. And I'm trying to insert myself in this situation. That's, I think, one of the major lessons that I'm taking from this story. Number one is you got to hang out at Starbucks more. I don't know, somehow. But number two, that Hashem obviously places the right people in the right places at the right time. And it's just up to... Anyways, go ahead. I'm sorry for interrupting.
But also the interesting point to note is about those people, that are placed in the right place, that they're also taking the initiative. They are also seizing the moment.
Absolutely. And I think we're all in places like that every single day. And we have a choice, which thing to either to just brush off those moments and then they just become moments. That's it. Or to actually make something of them and then things change. 100%.
So I wake up, in Crown Heights the next morning, and I end up going back over to that yeshiva that I was at the day before. Now, this yeshiva, it's a very special place, that it is actually made for young men who did not grow up in an observant, or religious Orthodox Jewish background, whatever you might want to call it, didn't grow up with a formal Jewish education, and now maybe would like to have that chance to be able to sit and learn in depth the Talmud and Jewish law and Hasidic teachings, and or maybe are on, becoming observant and would like to be in an environment more conducive for that. So different angles. That's what this yeshiva was founded for, actually in the 1960s. During the hippie era, when there were many Jewish hippies who were coming to Crown Heights and were becoming, coming back to their Jewish roots. So I went back over to the yeshiva, and I just, sat down in a few more classes, and I just kind of like made as if like I'm a new student there, and someone helped me find like an empty bed in one of the dorm rooms, and I just like became a part of the place, just of my own accord. Now, pretty quickly, the administration of the yeshiva found out that some random kid is just like, took up residence in the dorm. So I was, they spoke to me and asked me, who are you? Where are you coming from? Can we speak to your parents? We're happy to have you learn here, but maybe, you need to fill an application and, but we worked that all out. Not the speaking to my parents part, that I was not ready, but, I spoke to them at length, and they agreed, kind of help me out a little bit. So I just kind of like was just thrown into it. It just was something that just happened. Like literally the next day, that's it. I was like in yeshiva, a yeshiva student, basically just like going to classes throughout the day. The course load, in the syllabus in yeshiva is very intense. It is really, learning from early in the morning, with breaks, a few breaks throughout the day for meals. And you really learn, from 7:30, 8 in the morning until 9:30 at night, various subjects within Judaism. And that week, interestingly enough, when my life just kind of just like took a 360 in a way that I never could imagine it could have, and I began, thank God, just the stability alone was life-changing to me. Aside from the fact that I was beginning to live as a Jew, and I was excited about that. But it just, having stability and support from such a, loving and caring community was a really big thing for me, which really helped me very quickly stop using, to stop drinking. That week, my mother paid my cell phone bill and started calling me. She paid my bill to reopen the line, and she started calling me once a day. And I was just ignoring the call. And, a few days go by, and it's now Friday. And it's getting close to like my first Shabbat. Now, I never heard of Shabbos. I don't really know what it is. Someone, gave me some, beautiful poetic explanation about this day of rest and unplugging from everyday life. And I don't really know what it is. I'm just kind of going with it, and I'm excited to try it out. But what someone did tell me was to see what it's like to not use my phone for a day. So I'm like, big deal, This was, I still had a flip phone. This was 2009, so most people still had flip phones. That was the norm, And, okay, I'm not going to text anyone. Who am I texting anyways? Like, I didn't talk to anyone at that point in my life. But my mother's calling me, and I'm thinking, maybe I should just pick up. She's been calling me every day. She's really worried about me. I'll tell her that I'm fine. I'll tell her that I'll be able to brush her off, because I'll tell her it's almost Shabbos, even though she probably has no clue what Shabbos is. In my mind, I don't know my mother knows anything about Judaism. But I'm thinking, I was by, the night before, Thursday night in the yeshivas, they always make Farbrengens. They have a Hasidic gathering, we call it Farbrengen, where there's usually a mentor or a rabbi or some type of guest speaker that leads the gathering. And it's very laid back. Everyone, the yeshiva students sit around the table with, a little bit of, light refreshments, and you say a few l'chaims, and you sing Hasidic melodies, and you hear words of inspiration. And this is what the Hasidim have been doing for, a couple hundred years. And one of the things, the rabbi had said, that night before, he said something that really, really, struck me. and he spoke about the idea that even if a person doesn't understand something, or even if we're not, on a conscious level understanding, something, but your soul is always listening. The soul is always in touch. The soul is always in tune, and the soul is always waiting for that moment. The soul is always taking in, soaking in. So I thought to myself, I became very spiritual, like in like one day. So my mother is now calling me, and I'm thinking she has no idea what Shabbos is, but I'll tell her it's almost Shabbos, and I can't talk on my phone, and she won't get it, but her neshama will understand, and whatever. And I say, hey, what's up, Mom? As if we didn't speak, it's been 3 months since we spoke last. And my mother says, oh my gosh, Matthew, Devlin, where are you? We're so worried about you. Come home. Just please forget about everything. And I said, no, Mom, don't worry about me. Everything's fine. I'm in yeshiva. As if, you tell your mother, don't worry, then you follow by with, I'm in yeshiva. Usually mothers get concerned. So I asked my mother, do you know what yeshiva is? And she says, yeah, I'm Jewish. I know what yeshiva is. What kind of yeshiva? So I said, oh, it's with Chabad. Do you know what Chabad is? And she says, yeah, I'm Jewish. I know what Chabad is. I'm like, okay, sorry, forgive me. And then without missing a beat, my mother says, wait a second, it's Shabbos. You can't be on your phone. And I said, so I'm telling my mother, no, it's not, it's almost Shabbos. And she says, no, don't worry. Hang up, call me back after Shabbos.
Wow.
And the whole Shabbos, I'm like thinking, I really don't know what Shabbos is yet. But like my mother's telling me, call me after Shabbos. She didn't speak to me in months. And she's so worried about me. And, she tells me, no, go, hang up. So that's when I find out afterwards, and I call my mother, and I find out how she grew up keeping Shabbos and keeping kosher. And they were definitely, what she says, a very, very American family, very modern family. They went to public school, that's why she said she didn't consider that they were necessarily a religious family, but they were very traditional, that they had this, kosher and Shabbos. It was really from my grandmother. That was, my grandmother, it turns out she grew up in South Philly in the 1920s, the 1930s, when it was very, very Jewish. And you had, most of the Jewish families were keeping Shabbos and kosher. And, every block had a shtibel, every block had a small synagogue with a rabbi. And my grandmother lived next door to the rabbi of that, block, of that area. And she was best friends with the rabbi's daughter. And, that was when my grandmother grew up in a much more religious home. And, in a home, and even my grandmother, her first language was Yiddish. But even my mother growing up, my mother spoke Yiddish growing up. That was what she spoke with her parents when she was a young child. And eventually she said she fought it. She hated it. She hated speaking Yiddish. Her friends really didn't speak Yiddish so much. For them, it was like, that was their grandparents' thing. So she would act like she didn't understand until they just stopped speaking Yiddish to her. Which is really actually a real treat for my mother, that I speak Yiddish to my children. I learned Yiddish when I was in yeshiva, and I speak fluent Yiddish, and I speak to my children in Yiddish. So that's like a treat for my mother to hear whenever she visits or whenever she's on the phone with us.
Amazing. That's so amazing. Matt, can we back up for just a second? Your
Sure.
mom calls you. I just want to correct me if I'm wrong, okay? Because I'm just listening. I'm trying to listen for everyone here.
Please.
She calls you. You have how long of a conversation before she recognizes that?
30 seconds.
30 seconds. She hasn't spoken to you in how long?
3 months, maybe.
3 months. Okay, so not as long as I thought. I thought it was years. But 3 months she hasn't spoken to you. She knows you're on the road. She knows you're traveling on your own. 18 years old, 19 years old.
I don't know what she knows. She just knows she hasn't spoken to me.
Well, at this point, she knows you're in yeshiva.
And her first reaction.
The last time she kept Shabbos was when she was how old? In her youth. And her first reaction is, wow. And her first reaction is, it's almost Shabbos, or it's Shabbos. Hang up the phone. And she talks to you after Shabbos. Wow. Talk about a neshama that never rests.
That's it.
Okay. We want to try to wrap up. I know there's so much more to your story, but we've been an hour and a half at it. For me, time has been flying. I don't know if it's been like that for everybody. And I try not to let our events go too long, Sure. See some parents on the group. I'm afraid to ask what's happening with the kids. Anyways, but this story is worth it, I think. So you make up with your mother on the spot, or it's still
So when I called my mother back after Shabbos, that was it. Like we were like everything was totally fine. Like nothing ever happened. Like I never caused her the amount of pain that I caused her in life, which I'm still trying to make up for. It was everything was totally fine.
and she was happy. Her reaction was basically
Really
happy. You were settled. You had a place. You had a thing. Thank God.
Really
Thank God you
happy.
could talk to her a month earlier.
She was extremely happy. My siblings, I began to speak to my siblings again. Each one was different than the other. The younger ones, they didn't really have a clue what was happening. But my older siblings, some of them were, I have a sister who's more spiritual, so she was like, she thought it was cool what I was doing. Some of them were just kind of concerned. They weren't really sure, what was going on in my life, but they were happy that I had some type of stability in life at least. My father was not like so thrilled about it. He had said later, this was probably a year and a half later in that National Geographic documentary that you had mentioned, he said that he, at a time, when in my son's life, when he was vulnerable, he was glad that like a God-fearing people, took me in. But he kind of trails off at that. It wasn't really, it took a while. I spent about, to give the short version of it, I spent about 5 months learning in yeshiva and initially. And during that time, my life completely turned around, like completely 360. Not just, I became observant, and which was easy to do when you're excited about it. And I was in a very conducive environment, clearly for it. But it was also just, I became, a regular, normal functioning human being. I became a mensch. I became a good, upstanding person, as they say. And it just really, really solidified my life and just really brought a lot of clarity to my life.
You're saying some of the other things that have nothing to do with religion fell aside. No, the stealing, the drugs, the things like that.
Just getting in trouble with the law, just to kind of just whatever it was, the kind of the rebelling, all of that, kind of subsided. And I left yeshiva after about 5 months because I got to a point when I was no longer excited about it. I just wasn't really sure if it was for me. So I left yeshiva. My parents let me move back home. I dropped Jewish observance, even though I was still very excited to be a Jew. I was very proud to be a Jew. Like that I never gave up. I was very proud to be a Jew. I did feel that living as an observant Jew was like the ultimate goal, but I just felt it wasn't for me. I'm a young kid. I was 18. I wanted to just live my life. So I moved back home. My parents let me move.
And you dropped everything, or something?
Everything,
even tefillin. Everything.
I was still like learning a little bit. I had a pair of tefillin. I actually stole a pair of tefillin from the yeshiva and took it home with me because I was like, oh, maybe like I'll want to put on sometimes, and they won't mind because they also want me to put on tefillin. So I guess my stealing still kind of came in handy in some ways. I was living back at home. My parents I was living at home for like 1 month when my parents were away. I threw a huge party at my parents' house. My parents were livid, and I was no longer living at home again. And I was just kind of living from place to place with my friends, guest houses, guest rooms. And I got into an accident skateboarding, going downhill. I fell, and I going about 35 miles per hour, and I fractured my skull. And I was in the hospital. I was in a coma. My family was told that I had lived very little time to live. And long story short, I obviously lived, but it wasn't without a lot of setbacks. The doctors thought I was in a coma for a very short time, just a few days. And when I came out from a coma, miraculously, that they thought I was, they didn't think I would live. They still said that the doctors said that I would have a very long road to recovery, that I would have to relearn how to walk. I was walking that day. I would have to go to a lot of speech therapy. And then once I was off, once I was out of a coma long enough and I was off of the narcotics they were giving me, and I was more coherent, I was speaking totally fine. So the speech therapy was not necessary. They did send me to a rehabilitation center where they, even with all this kind of like everything beating their expectations, by a million, I still had to go to a rehabilitation center where they thought I would spend a few months. I was only there for 1 week. I was walking fine. I was talking fine. I had to go to a neuropsychologist because they thought, certain thought processes would be, out of whack. Went there one time for the initial assessment, totally fine. I had headaches for like a month. And, obviously something like that was really, really, it was like another life-changing moment that happened.
Kind of like a wake-up call.
It was a big wake-up call. Right. It was a big wake-up call. And I just realized, like, what is this life that I'm living like? Like, what am I living for? And what is like my purpose in this world? And I realized that really until now in my life, I was just really living a very selfish life. Everything I was doing was always, what can I get out of others? How can I use other people for my own gain, for my own benefit? And I started really thinking about, what I had learned in yeshiva, which is like, what can I do for other people? That was like, if there was anything I learned in yeshiva was like, I'm here because there is something I can do for other people. Whether it's helping others spiritually, like had been done for me, putting on tefillin, introducing me to yeshiva, or helping other people with their, their physical health, their mental well-being. Like Mendy gave me an ear to listen, to listen for a few hours in Starbucks that night, gave me a little bit of advice, like other people had done for me along the way. All these people that had, as you mentioned earlier, that were in this right place at the right time, that they seized the moment and they saw what could they do for me in, whether a spiritual good deed or a more of a corporal good deed. And like, why am I not living like that? Why am I not living that way? So it was almost Rosh Hashanah, and I ended up, really how the story finishes off, I ended up going to the closest Chabad house, which was about 45 minutes away for Rosh Hashanah, which was on a campus, Franklin Marshall College. And the rabbi invited me back for Yom Kippur and for Sukkot, and I kept going back for Shabbos, and I became observant again. I finished high school, and I got into the school where the Chabad rabbi was, and I had gotten a job over there. But ultimately, I ended up going back to yeshiva, which my mother was very happy with. My father was not so thrilled that I decided to go back to yeshiva instead of university. I ended up spending 5 years learning in yeshiva altogether. And during that time, I made up with all of my family. I made up with my father. It was different steps along the way with my father, but eventually, we thank God we built up a very close relationship. And to this day, we enjoy a good relationship with each other. We don't talk as often probably as either of us wish we could. We live in different places, and we, living different lives, different schedules.
Do you go home often?
But what's that?
I was asking, do you go home often?
I tried to get to Pennsylvania about once a year. It's been more tricky now because of Corona. But sometimes my family comes down here. My mother is coming for Passover coming up. So after I learned in yeshiva for 5 years was when I was introduced by mutual friends to my wife, who was a wonderful young lady, still young, I guess she hopes I would say that. We hit it off, as they say, and we got married, and we have 3 children, Knei Nahara, Menachem Mendel, and my daughter is
Mendy, who will one day be sitting in a Starbucks somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe a different reasons than Mendy, but
different reasons than that, Mendy. Yeah, God willing.
But
wow.
And Zelda Rochel, and our youngest is Sarah Rivka, named after my bubby, passed away.
Wow. The bubby who spoke Yiddish and who your mom, right? Wow, that's beautiful.
That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
I just want to end off with one question. I try to end off all of our interviews with. I have a lot of questions, and if anybody else has questions, please put them in the chat. But I want to give you one more chance before we dive into like real Q&A. Just short question answer. I want to ask you one question. There are so many lessons. I actually thought in the middle of interrupting you and saying, if everybody can type into the chat, and maybe you can do that now, a lesson that they learned from Mattis's story, because there's so much to learn. People are saying how inspiring it was, and about people have different insights into the story. But if people can write lessons, just a one-line lesson that you took from this story, I think we would all appreciate from seeing what we each heard in this story. But my question for you, Mathis, while they're doing that, is if you can share with us, when you tell this story, and you've done it many times, I know at different Chabad houses, and sometimes interviews, and sometimes presentations, etc. What do you hope people will get out of your story?
The biggest hope that I get that people will see is the idea of what we call in Hebrew hashkacha pratis, which they always call in English divine providence, but I think it's not always so clear what exactly that means, divine providence. And a lot of times it just sounds like some, another religious concept. The whole idea of hashkacha pratis, this idea that, that Hashem, that God is involved in every event of our lives, it has a lot of interplay, because at the end of the day, we also have free choice, right? And on one hand, we say that there is hashkacha pratis, there is the idea that God is involved in every moment, but he oversees what's happening in the greater picture of it. At the same time, our interplay, our involvement is that we get to make the choice of how we take hold of that moment of when we recognize divine providence happening in our lives. A lot of people could say, for me, from my side of the story, wow, it was such divine providence. It was karma. It was good luck, good fortune, what have you. I don't know what you want to call it, that I was always in the right place at the right time. This thing happened and that thing happened. They look bad. They turned out good. Wow, it was so great. I met Mendy in Starbucks. He told me to go to this place. And then I met another guy in Starbucks, and it was just always in the right place at the right time. It was so life-changing for me. But and you could even go further and say, whoa, it's so cool. Like, it affected so many other people. My wife and I, we went on to after we were married, we spent 2 years in California at the University of California, Riverside. We were we ran the Chabad house there. And really we had a lot of success. We really influenced a lot of Jewish students who went on to be leaders in their own right, in AEPI or in Hillel or in Chabad and other places, where they went on to inspire their fellow students, their fellow peers. And now I am a teacher. I teach first grade, seventh grade, and high school at a Jewish school in Miami, where also I'm able to, now pass over what was inspiration and Judaism that was given to me. And many of my students, I see them giving over to their friends and their families. And you could, wow, it's like this whole thing where my life was changed and a ripple effect. And that's great. Like, I love that. That's wonderful. It's a feel-good story. My mother now keeps kosher. My siblings all celebrate Hanukkah now in their own homes. There's a lot of details to that, and you could ask questions about my siblings if you want, and I'm happy to share about it. And it's a big deal. It's a huge deal that my siblings in their own homes are celebrating different things of Judaism, even if it's not their a mainstay, but it's part of their home. But that's, to me, is not the main point of divine providence. It's not the main point of hashkacha pratis. To me, it's what Mendy did when I ran into Mendy, and Mendy, who was trying to hang out with some girl, which would not be what his parents would have approved of, at 15 years old, coming from a Chabad home. And he was not really caring about his, Jewish upbringing so much, but he recognized in that moment, I have an opportunity to help someone here. Here's another teenager who has no clue that he's even Jewish, yet he's telling me that his mother's a Jew. I have the opportunity to do something for him. It seems like he's going through something in life. I can give him an ear to hear. I could speak to him a little bit, tell him about his Judaism. And he has no idea that it's going to change my life. And it's certainly not changing his life. It's just, giving up a little bit of his time. And yet it did go on to change my life. And when I met some guy, when I walk into 770 a few hours later, and some guy asks me to put on tefillin, that guy's put on tefillin, he stands there. He's always there. Everyone knows who he is. He's always standing there, and he's put on tefillin with a lot of people. And it's never changed his life. Nothing ever made a difference in his life that he put on tefillin with people. And he has no idea that my life is going to be changed forever. But he recognized in this moment, if he has the opportunity to help someone do a mitzvah, put on tefillin, he's going to seize the opportunity and he's going to do it for them. And so on and so forth. All these people, this young couple the next night on their shidduch date, where they took me to get a burger and fries, and then this guy gave me a bed to sleep in for the night, just taking care of me, just trying to make sure that I'm taken care of and I have a safe place and my stomach is not growling, And each of these people that I'm meeting, they recognize, they had no idea that there was all these other people, but when each one of us recognizes every moment that we have in life, every person we meet, a stranger, a friend, a coworker, a family member that we run into in Ralph's or at work or just walking down the street, whatever we could do for that person, whether it's letting the guy clean your windshield, outside of Walgreens, and for a few bucks, or you buy him a bag of chips and a soda or whatever, or it's like a coworker and you see his, you just have the opportunity to help someone with anything in their life. When you seize that moment and someone else is seizing that moment and another person is seizing the moment, you have no idea how you could change an entire person's life, like what happened with me. And then it doesn't just stop with me. Then you see that ripple effect that occurs. And I think that's what we have to really, really have to live with. That every moment that we have, every person we run into, whether it's someone we see every day or someone that we've only seen once in our life, what can we do for them? How can we help them? Why am I running into that person? What's the purpose of that moment?
I love it. 100%. I could not agree more.